That, of course, is the great Paul McCartney.
Welcome to Expert Minutes. I'm John Hambone McGuire.
This conversation
Sweet, juicy. Where did that word come from?
I don't know.
Bet you never thought you'd hear that on the radio.
Good evening, or wherever you are, whatever time it is, wherever you're watching this. I'm Graham Mack, and I host the Pod 20 on Podcast Radio, which is the countdown of the top 20 podcasts in the world. And one of the perks of the job is I get to chat to some of the world's greatest podcasters. And one of them is Simon Squibb. How are you, Simon?
Good. It's great to be here, Graham.
Great to talk to you again. You're a leading entrepreneur. How many startups are you responsible for? It's about 18 now, isn't it?
I'm actually building my 19th startup at the moment, so quite the journey.
You're an angel investor as well, and we'll get to all that. But we're here to talk about podcasts. And last time I spoke to you, you were doing one called the Good Luck Club podcast. That's changed since we spoke. It's probably about a year ago now we spoke. What's the podcasting situation with you now?
Yeah, I think, well, the podcast world has also evolved. And when I originally started, it was really just a hobby. And I was fascinated by this concept of luck and how luck played a role in people's lives. So I wanted to do a whole series on luck. But I got all the answers I needed. And we did 60 episodes. And I got everything I needed. And I decided that I would interview the world's most successful entrepreneurs and download their knowledge and create a new podcast called Pep Talk, which is one of my podcasts now that I'm very excited about.
You say one of them? You've got others going too?
Yeah, we just launched a new one called the Unicorn Podcast. And this is where we interview billion-dollar founders, companies that have gone from $0 to $1 billion and how they did that. So there's a new one. But the one I'm working the hardest on at the moment is Pep Talk.
Is Pep Talk. Okay. Well, before we get into more on the podcast, let's get a bit of background about you. You started as an entrepreneur when you were very young. You were 15 and you were kind of forced into it, weren't you?
I didn't know I was an entrepreneur. I think like a lot of people maybe listening don't realize they are. It turns out anyone can be an entrepreneur. That wasn't sold to me as the case when I was younger. Entrepreneurs were always seen as this slightly odd breed. Only a selective few could be one. But yeah, it turns out I am one. But I was forced into entrepreneurship at 15 years old when my mother kicked me out of home. And I was homeless for a little while, and I literally had to become an entrepreneur to survive.
And it was originally gardening. Was that just out of desperation?
Yeah, and also when the entrepreneurial muscle woke up in my head, I'd be standing outside this beautiful house in Cambridge that had a really messy garden. And I was like, how can this house, which is clearly worth a lot of money, have a messy garden? It doesn't quite make sense. And yeah, so something just clicked. And I thought, well, they must need some help with their garden. And I knocked on the door and won the business to be their gardener. No website, no brochure, not even a registered company. And I got the business to do their garden. And that gave me the idea that maybe there'll be quite a few people that wouldn't mind that service. And I knocked on hundreds of doors and managed to convince people to let me be their gardener.
But what about tools and equipment?
Small details, these are just things that stop most people. Having no ability to actually look after a garden or any understanding of plants and flowers and how grass actually needs management. I knew none of these things, but you can learn it all on the job, it turns out. And the equipment, interestingly enough, when I got everybody to say yes to me being their gardener, I went back the following day and asked them for a 50% deposit and used that cash to buy all the equipment secondhand and cheaply, and rented some of the equipment. So it wasn't as huge a capital expense as perhaps if you were doing a business plan. Sometimes when you've got no choice because you've committed to doing a certain job, you find a way.
Yeah. And there must have been a tremendous amount of freedom because, and I think you mentioned this in your TED talk, is you had nothing, so you had nothing to lose, so you could go for it. Do you think that a lot of people would make great entrepreneurs and should be entrepreneurs because they're pretty unhappy with their life, but they just are in a stage where they they can't, or they're unwilling to risk everything.
Exactly. I think it's a competitive advantage to have nothing. I've gone through that experience myself. Not having possessions and perhaps having these things that tie you down, stop you from taking risk or listening to your instinct about what you're capable of doing, I think is a real strength. And I always tell people, if you really want to build something amazing, be willing to risk it all. And so, yeah, I think that's a trait you'll notice in all successful entrepreneurs. People like Elon Musk, for example, has, of course, made a lot of money initially in PayPal, made 110 million US dollars selling PayPal, creating PayPal. But he risked all that money to do SpaceX and Tesla and all these other things. And actually, that's why he's the richest man on the planet today, because he doesn't really hold on to the things he's got and just try to hoard these things. He continues to take chances and take risk, which risk leads to luck, is what I discovered interviewing lots of people about luck. It's nothing to do with hard work, actually. Being lucky, it's not about the harder you work, the luckier you get. It turns out it's about how much risk you take, the luckier you get. And so, yeah, it's all about taking risk and not holding on to the little bit of savings you've got and wondering, well, if I spend that, then I won't have savings anymore. Not investing in yourself and not investing in doing what you love every day. That's the mistake people make.
Yeah, you hear so many stories about people who lost a job and then years later they say it was the best thing that ever happened to them, because now
Totally.
they've got the free. And I speak from personal experience. I'm not sure if you know, but a couple of years ago I was running a radio station in London and I got fired, and then within a couple of months the pandemic hit. So all the interviews at radio stations and interviews with the BBC and everything all got cancelled, and I suddenly had nothing and no way to make a living. So I researched ways to make a living from home because it was lockdown, we couldn't go out. And I discovered that there were authors online who were looking for people to narrate and produce their audiobooks. And since then, I now have well over 100 audiobooks on sale on Audible. And I would never have done that. And now I love it. I've invested in that. I bought this booth, which is about $6,000, and upgraded microphones and kit and stuff. And I just haven't looked back, and it's going from strength to strength. And every month I do better than the last. But it is something if I had this, it was a nice job running a well-paying job running a radio station in London. I wouldn't have tried it, but I was kind of forced into trying to find something, and it worked. So I know exactly what you mean about that. Yeah.
I think sometimes, people don't realize that if you have bad luck in life, my experience has been that it's just a matter of time before there is literally some reason that it happened and it was good luck, no matter what it is. And so, what looks like bad luck can turn out to be luck, good luck over time. And it doesn't maybe feel like it at the time. And I've had plenty of what I would consider bad luck in my career. I had a business that failed, for example, that I was really upset about. And then I look back and I'm grateful that it failed. And so, it's weird for perhaps people to grasp this concept that failure, for example, is bad. But I look back at those moments where I failed. And the only reason I have this life I love today is because of that failure that I've had in the past.
Yeah. What about the people, though, that have everything and then just go ahead and give it up? Like, for instance, and you mentioned this in your TED Talk as well, Bill Gates, who was at, I forget which university, was at Harvard, and he just dropped out. And there are so many stories of people, I think Steve Jobs dropped out of, so many people who drop out of what looks like a path to success and decide to go their own way and succeed without it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think enough people do that. In fact, I think we've got the opposite problem. A lot of people are in jobs they don't love, and they almost make excuses for it. Like, I'll do this for a few more years until I get the experience I need to do what I'm meant to be doing. Or they don't even listen to what they're meant to be doing. They just assume the path they're on is the right path. And so I think enough people don't analyze actually what is it I'm meant to be doing. Instead of, like, at school, you're always asked, what are you going to do when you grow up? I think that's the wrong question. And that's why I think education is broken. I think the question that should be asked is, what problem would you like to solve when you grow up? What problem would you like to be involved in fixing? And that's much more exciting and more motivating, and I think more long-term rewarding. I mean, the other part of it is I did a lot of research on, like, people when they get older, the regrets that they have, and most of the time people only regret what they didn't do. So if you're sitting on a good idea, or you feel a certain urge to do something and then you don't do it, those are the times in life, later in life, you have regret that you didn't try it. I had never met anybody in my research who basically said, "Oh, I did this thing and I regret it," whatever it was, whether it's
That never came up. So no one
most of the time, nearly the only regrets that people would highlight would be ones where they hadn't done something. So they hadn't asked that person that they loved to marry them, for example, or they hadn't gone and started that business idea that they had, and they wish they just tried it. Those are the regrets that people tend to have. The things they don't do, the things that people had actually done, were more like stories. I think about myself. I've been to Hong Kong, I've lived in Shanghai and Beijing and Bali, and every time I moved to these different locations, I had fear and almost didn't do it. But because I did do it, they're stories. They didn't always work out financially. They didn't always work out how I'd pictured it. But in the end, I'm glad I did it, because I had an idea and I did it. And I think that's the human experience we all need to keep reminding ourselves to have.
You mentioned Hong Kong there. Now, when you got to Hong Kong, you hit the deck running. Was that because you had to, once again? You had to swim or drown? Yeah.
Well, Hong Kong's second most expensive city in the world to live, so there really isn't much time to sit around pondering what should I do. And I think that's also a good thing. Sometimes you just have to get on with it. I think sometimes when people have too much choice, they don't make any choice at all. So when I went to Hong Kong, very expensive place, and to make life there survivable, I had to build a business. Again, had to start something. And it was just an amazing experience as you're going to Hong Kong in particular, just because, I mean, for anyone listening that's grown up in England, we sometimes think that England is the be all and end all. You go to another place and you realize just how slow England can be sometimes, and that's what I realized when I went to Hong Kong. Things got done in a day that I think would take 6 months to a year in England, and decisions were made quickly. Age was not an issue. If you had the ability in Hong Kong, then you could make it happen. It's nothing to do with age. I find England does have an age restriction on, you can't be a CEO of a company or senior management until you're in your late 30s, that type of mindset. And that wasn't the case in Hong Kong. At 24 years old, I was building my own agency called Fluid, helping brands like CNN launch in Japan. And I feel like that was all about your ability as opposed to your age. And that's what a market like Hong Kong gave me.
So why did you move to London?
Well, I moved back to London 4 years ago. Coming up to 5 years ago, actually. I'm losing track of time thanks to COVID. But when I sold my last company, a company called Fluid, to PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I just suddenly had all this money in the bank. And I thought to myself, what do I want next out of my life? And at that same moment, my wife was turning 40, and she said, maybe this is the time we should be having children. And so at that moment, for the first time, I considered it, and we said, well, why don't we go live somewhere else for a while? Because we got a bit comfortable in Hong Kong. We needed to mix it up, I think. And we were originally going to go to LA. But then Donald Trump got elected in America, and we couldn't face going to the airport with Donald Trump's face on the wall. So we said, let's go to England initially. And then when we got to England, I love it here. And the humor, it's cheesy maybe, but it is. They are my people, and I think it was nice to come back to your home. And I've been great. Now I've got a son who's 4.5 years old, and it's been great, showing him British life and giving him an insight to where his father grew up. For example, I've taken him around there and stuff like that. And
you retired briefly, didn't you?
Yeah, that was always the dream. I think when you're young, I always wanted this. I had this in my head that I would retire at 40. So I retired at 40. And it's kind of silly now looking back, but it was one of those kind of like bucket list items that I could retire if I wanted, never needing to work again a day in my life. That seemed like the dream, right? You know, put your feet up, play golf all the time, go to the gym. And so at 40, when I could financially do it, as long as I didn't live over 100, I could financially do it. And assuming I wasn't going to live over 100, I mapped it all out financially. I didn't need to work anymore. So I stopped. And I became a full-time parent, actually, initially, and which I really loved. And I had a whole new respect for parents in general. But it's the hardest job I've ever done is be a full-time parent. I built companies and had companies, hundreds of people working for me, huge responsibility on cash flow and stuff like that. And it pales into insignificance when it comes to looking after a child and that intensity. And so, but then as my son grew up, I had 2 years where I really was retired. And as my son grew up and started to, you know, have a bit of a voice and a life of his own, and went to nursery and stuff, COVID hit. So at that moment, I thought, right, I better start doing something. And that's when I launched my first podcast, where I thought I would interview people and find out about, you know, the secret formula of luck.
And you wrote a book about luck, and you have a formula for hacking luck. Can you briefly explain it to us, or do we have to buy the book?
No, you don't need to buy the book. I can tell you it now, and that's it. You don't need to buy the book. You know, I've managed to drag the book out into 40,000 words, but it can be summed up in this quick intro. Luck was a fascinating subject for me, and I always wondered why I made it, and someone else who maybe is 15 years old, drops out of school, you know, maybe doesn't make it. And so I don't think I'm particularly smart. I'm quite streetwise, and I guess I've got a lot of life experience now, but I'm not that smart, and I'm dyslexic, and I have, you know, these weaknesses. I find it hard to focus on anything for too long, and all these things. So why did I make it when other people smarter, perhaps, who have more skill and less issues, haven't made it? And so I studied luck, and it turns out that luck basically is broken into two parts. And if you hear this, you don't need to buy the book. And it's simply this: 2% of your life, only 2%, and I've done a mathematical equation on this for all the people that I've studied, 2% of your life is random luck. This is luck you cannot influence. So an example of that might be where you're born. You really can't, no matter how hard you work, you're going to be born when your parents decide to have you. And that will have an effect on your life in quite a major way. We all know that. So depending on where you're born and what environment you're born into, your life can be dramatically affected. But that's only 2% of your life, that type of luck. The other 98% of luck, it turns out, can be influenced. And it really breaks into three elements that help you get more luck. And so the first one I mentioned already is risk. The more risk you take, the luckier you get, is a better Instagram quote than the harder you work, the luckier you get. But risk really does matter. And risk links to fear. And you need to really learn to enjoy fear. See fear as a superpower. It's been a bit misunderstood in today's world. People think when they feel fear nowadays, they can just say no to something and not feel fear anymore. That's a mistake. You're meant to leverage fear. It makes you run faster, think differently, almost gives you superhuman powers. And so you need to lean into fear and learn to love risk. The more risk you take, the luckier you get. The other two elements are basically persistence. In a nutshell, a lot of people just don't follow through, and they don't know how to follow through. It's always used as an example via sales. You know, the top 10% of salespeople, a very famous university did a study on salespeople. The top 10% of salespeople will contact someone 5 times before they'll consider the lead dead. And they're considered the top 10%. So they might send an initial email, follow-up email, a note, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, follow up again. And then one final time, if they don't get any response, that's it. They assume the lead is dead. But the top 1% of salespeople, they had this persistent mindset. And I realize I'm one of these people. But basically, you never stop contacting people if you feel that the product that you have, for example, is a good fit for them. And so when I started my agency business, I wrote down 50 clients that I wanted to work with. And it took me 9 years to get all 50 clients on board. And I did that by every single month I would find some way to connect to that company and the people behind it, where it was wishing the individual who's running the marketing department a happy birthday, or sending them an insight piece around their industry and what was changing that they might find useful, or happy Chinese New Year. Whatever I could, every single month I found a way to connect, and that led to eventually getting all of those clients on board for my business. And so that was persistence. And then the final thing that you need to really increase your chances of luck 100-fold is to know your destination. And a lot of people don't know where they're going. So I describe it like getting in a car and not knowing where you're actually going. That's what a lot of people are doing. They don't really know what they're trying to achieve in life, what their personal life plan is. And when they run a business, for example, they don't have a clear goal for the business. I call it purpose. And so, but once you know where you're going, then you know what type of car you need. And people always say things like, well, I want to make $1 billion company. And I always tell people that money is just fuel for the car. And if you don't know your destination, you don't know what type of car you need, and therefore you don't know what type of fuel you need. In some cases, you don't even need a car. You could probably do it on a bike, so you don't need any money. But yeah, a lot of the time people don't know their destination, and that's what reduces their chances of luck. So if you embrace fear, are persistent, and know your destination, then your huge upswing in luck often means that you make it.
So the podcasting then, you decide you're going to come out of retirement and you're going to start podcasting. What did you know about, had you had any broadcasting experience before or anything to start it off from scratch? How did that go?
No, I don't know why I feel like saying, 3 years ago when I started, podcasts weren't as popular as they are now. And so low quality mic and an inexperienced host could get away with it. And as you know, we had a very popular podcast. So I think in the early days, what I do have is a very passionate interest in people.
And that comes across with the people you talk to. You're talking a similar language. You've got a mutual admiration for each other because of the stories, but you really do enjoy trying to get inside these people.
I do. I love learning.
Yeah.
I think what I love about podcasting in general, but what I love about my particular focus, which is on these really successful people and their knowledge, is that you can spend 20 minutes, an hour with someone and learn everything they've learned in 20 years of doing business, and some of these people at the top of their game, like YouTube experts and people that have, just done incredible things and built incredible businesses. I just interviewed the founder of Shazam, for example. It was Apple's biggest acquisition ever. And it was an app that you just hold up to music and it tells you what song is playing and then allows you to download it. And so, how did he come up with this idea? How did he make that idea real? He's not even an engineer. And how did he make hundreds of millions from this concept? And so I've had my own entrepreneurial journey, but I always find it fascinating the many, many different ways that people have done things. And so I've always enjoyed learning that way myself too. I learn by listening to someone and their life experience and their personal viewpoint on the world. And I find it far, far more interesting than perhaps just, traditional instruction manual or even book for that matter. I love hearing people's real life stories and not just, how it's been written out in a book sometimes can be very structured so it sells, but not necessarily the nitty gritty personal stuff that you can get from someone in a podcast.
Right, and that was when you started. That was the Good Luck Club, as we mentioned earlier. You mentioned another one there. Was the Unicorn? Is it the Unicorn podcast? What's that one all about then?
Yeah, I think as the podcast world has got so crowded now, I'm being much more niche. So we have two podcasts. The Unicorn podcast is focused on interviewing billion-dollar founders and how they built these companies. And there's 2,300 billionaires in the world, and so I thought it would be interesting to interview them and find out how they did it. These are self-made billionaires, I would hasten to add. So these people that have created it from nothing. And what's interesting, the common thread so far is that quite often these people do start with no money. And they quite often start with an idea that everyone believes is not possible to make happen. And so there's so many people out there, therefore don't do it, but they do it. And so that's the Unicorn podcast. And it's called the Unicorn podcast because that's the terminology you give to a company that's worth $1 billion.
Right.
And so that's one. And then Pep Talk is a simpler version. And basically, we interview experts in certain subjects like YouTube or branding, and they give us literally their 20 years worth of knowledge in 20 minutes. And to me, it's just the fastest way to learn anything. I don't know if anyone's listening to watch the Matrix movie, but to me, it's like when you plug in that I know karate, like you plug in that chip, and suddenly all these things that seem so complicated, like marketing, become so transparent and simple because the people that have spent their lives studying it explain it to you so that you get it. And that's what Pep Talk is. So they're the two podcasts I'm presently hosting.
Now, to subscribe to them, are they on the same feed, or are they on? Do you have to subscribe to them individually, or do they both come up on the same one?
Same feed.
Good Luck, right? And is that the same one that the Good Luck Club was on as well?
Yes. So
right. So if you were already subscribing to that, yeah, great. So you've already got your super fans and your core audience, and now you're giving them you're giving them even more without them doing anything at all. That's very smart.
Exactly.
You see people who have podcasts and they go, and don't forget to check out our other podcast. And then you go, where the hell do I find it? And you've got that thing going on. So that's very, very clever. Simple.
It's an interesting hack, isn't it? A lot of people don't think about this. I agree with you. I think there are some downsides to the model, which is if, for example, you go and say to Siri, "Hey Siri, play Pep podcast," which now Siri might try. Then sometimes our podcast comes up, but if you go and say, "Hey Siri, play the Unicorn podcast," it doesn't come up because it's registered under Pep Talk. But the good news is, and I'm always thinking about the listeners that we have, is that it's all on one feed, so that and the content is all about entrepreneurship in the end. So if you're interested in learning about business and entrepreneurship for free, then you can stay on the same feed. Which seems to work. But yeah, like these strategies always have their strengths and weaknesses. But I guess that's why a lot of people do have separate channels, so things like that are possible.
And what podcasts inspire you?
Yeah, it's funny you asked me this because I just over dinner told my wife I'm coming on podcast radio, and she's like, "Well, what podcast are you listening to at the moment, Simon?" And I said to her, "The truth is, I'm running a project called the Purposeful Project, and I'm trying to help 10 million people start and grow a business. And so I spend most of my time at the moment on the strategy of my own business. I'm not consuming much content. I built a big following on TikTok. I've got nearly 400,000. Well, I've got over 450,000 followers on there now. And so I tend to spend my time either producing content or trying to figure out how to help people who can't find a job create one for themselves. So I'm actually not consuming much content at the moment, which is something I do need to do more. But for the last 6 months, I really haven't. I've been heads down building a business. And
you work mainly from home, or do you have a commute?
No, I work from home. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a big factor. Who was I talking to? I talked to somebody the other day about this, and we were talking about podcasts and usage. And since so many of us, like myself included, have started working from home, we do consume fewer podcasts because we don't have that commute, which was the major place where I certainly used. I had about a 40-minute each way podcast in a commute into London, and I was all podcasts. I mean, obviously I had to listen to the radio station as well, but which I did in the morning, but in the afternoon when things were all running okay and I was coming home, I'd put a podcast on. But I bet that's why as well, because you don't have that commute time. Yeah,
it's true.
Factor in it.
I think also, I think a lot of people will have this conflict, I guess. There's so much content. You've got Netflix, you've got, Disney Plus, you've got YouTube. Yes, you've got Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You've got so many different ways to consume content. And I that's one of the reasons I've gone very focused with my own content, because what I'm saying is, if you want to learn about how to build a business, then come and listen to my content. And if you're thinking of starting a business, which a lot of people are these days, that seems to be the cool new thing to do. everyone wants to start their own business, and they can because of technology and how easy it is now to start your own business, then I kind of want to be a destination product. So you say, right, I want to go and learn marketing, so I'm going to go listen to Simon's podcast. I want to learn from these billionaire founders who built these businesses up and their personal wealth from nothing. How did they do it? I want to go learn. So I think that's the future of content. It has to be, it can't be general. There will always be the odd mainstream product that people might just accidentally listen to because it's on their feed. But I think generally people are seeking out certain bits of information to make their lives better. And therefore you need to be a destination content provider. You need to be providing a certain thing that the market needs, as opposed to just a general chit chat product.
Yeah. So you actually change people's lives, which you do as an angel investor. How many businesses have you invested in since you've been doing that?
So I just
Startups?
invested in a new company last week, actually. So I have to update my number to 76 startups.
Wow.
Wow. I've invested in a lot of businesses in my career, and that's one of my joys, to invest in other people's dreams and try and help other people's dreams come true. And me be the person supporting them as opposed to building the business myself. I enjoy sitting on both sides of that fence.
And do they pay off? I mean, you're an investor, so if they work out, then you do well. Can you give us the ratio? Is that a fair question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've never done a ratio. I guess I've always done it on this context that I've still got money in the bank, so I can keep doing it. And so, and when I don't have money in the bank, I guess, when I've made quite a lot of investments in recent years, and luckily some of them have paid off. But if they hadn't, I'd probably be holding back investing in any more. But so it's all my own money. It's not a fund. A lot of people who do this raise a fund, which is other people's money, and then deploy it. But this is actually my own money. So I'm very fortunate that I've just made more money than I've lost. And but a large proportion of the companies fail. I think that's I always go into these projects expecting to lose all my money, and then I'm always pleasantly surprised. It's the only way you can stay sane, I think. You wouldn't if you have expectation, then you'll be disappointed. And I find that for some of the businesses, they're 10, 11, 12, 13-year investments as well. So you can't really deploy the money and sit there waiting for it to come back. You deploy the money and you help the people that are building the businesses. And then one day you get an email saying, I'm afraid the company's closed down and you've lost all your money. Or you get an email saying, we're IPOing and we're going to be sending you your check. So, it is literally, you don't know which one it's going to be until it happens.
Wow. Okay. So the podcast to watch out for is Pep Talk. Can you give us some highlights of past episodes people should maybe seek out, or give us a bit of a clue to some guests you've got coming up that are definitely worth listening to?
I it's always hard to pick your favorite child, but I think there's been some brilliant conversations recently. I spoke to Anne Bowden, who's the founder of Starling Bank, and she talks about how for 2 years she wanted to build this $1 billion company that she has built, and everyone kept telling her no. And then she walked onto a super yacht with a billionaire who gave her $54 million in one meeting to start Starling Bank. And so it's an inspirational story, definitely worth checking out. And she says it herself. She's just not, you look at her and think, well, this is not the person that's going to start a high-tech $1 billion new bank. But she did. And so, I've over my career as a podcaster now, I do love every single episode. I think every single episode brings a certain bit of knowledge to the listener and teaches them something that perhaps they didn't know. It always teaches me something I don't know in business. And I've built 19 companies and invested in 76 startups. And I still personally learn every time I talk to these successful entrepreneurs. So I think we're up to 200 episodes now. And I honestly think that every single episode brings a certain value if you want to learn about business and entrepreneurship that is hard to explain until you listen to these podcasts.
And what's next for Simon Squibb?
That's a good question. We're building a product called Entrepreneur House, which is basically accommodation for people to stay in a house and get somewhere warm and to sleep, surrounded by like-minded entrepreneurial people. And we're dreaming that this Entrepreneur House will be on Netflix. so that people can not only come and stay in the house and learn and get access to knowledge and get help with their businesses, but we can also make people famous by filming their story and sharing that with the world, and educating people on a mass scale about how anyone could be an entrepreneur. You just need training. No one's born a doctor, no one's born a lawyer. There's lots of different lawyers and there's lots of different types of doctors. You all need training. So I really want to bring entrepreneurship mainstream. And that's the plan with products like Entrepreneur House.
Excellent. Well, good luck with that. And anybody watching this that would like to find out more about Simon Squibb or find out how to get the links to the podcasts and Entrepreneur House, it's all on there on Simon's website. And below me, you can see the Podcast Radio website. But if you're watching this on YouTube, in the comments, in the blurb, you will see a link to Simon's website. And all the links to everything there, everything that we've talked about today is all in there in the blurb on YouTube. Whether you're watching this live or you're watching the recorded version, the links are there. Simon, is there anywhere else they need to go to find you, or is everything covered in that website there?
You did a great job, Graham. You know what you're doing. And simonsquibb.com or peptalk.co.uk. But you just search me and you'll find all the content.
Fantastic. Simon Squibb, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm glad it's just going so well. It's going from strength to strength. Thanks again. Of course, you can catch the podcast as well on Podcast Radio, don't forget. And I'll talk to you next Friday. Well, across the weekend, you can hear the Pod 20. And next Friday, 5 p.m. will be when the brand new Pod 20 is on. And in 2 Fridays' time, Simon will be my special guest on that show. That's Friday, 5 p.m. Not this Friday, the one after, the Pod 20. And my special guest will be Simon Squibb. Thanks a lot, Simon.
Thank you, Graham. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.